We live in a world that worships connection, that preaches the gospel of constant company and perpetual togetherness. Society whispers incessantly that solitude is loneliness wearing a mask, that the desire to be alone signals brokenness, depression, or social failure. We are taught to fear the quiet spaces within ourselves, to fill every moment with noise, distraction, and the comforting presence of others. This narrative has become so deeply embedded in our collective consciousness that we rarely question its validity, accepting it as an immutable truth about human nature. But what if this widely accepted belief is not merely incomplete, but fundamentally backwards? What if the soul's cry for solitude is not a retreat from life, but the most courageous advance towards it? The moments when you feel most compelled to withdraw from the world, to seek the sanctuary of your own company, may not be symptoms of inadequacy, but signs of profound spiritual awakening. These stirrings within you are not pathological. They are archetypal, arising from the deepest wells of human experience and psychological development that Carl Jung spent his life exploring and understanding. Consider this paradox. In a culture obsessed with connection, why do so many feel fundamentally disconnected? Why does the constant chatter of social interaction often leave us feeling more isolated than genuine solitude ever could? The answer lies in understanding that there exists a fundamental difference between the loneliness that seeks to escape itself and the sacred solitude that seeks to find itself. Jung recognized this distinction as central to the process of individuation, the journey towards becoming who we truly are rather than who others expect us to be. When your soul cries out for solitude, it is not surrendering to weakness, it is responding to an ancient call towards wholeness. This yearning is not about rejecting others, but about finally meeting yourself without the distorting mirrors of external expectations and social performance. It is the psyche's way of creating space for the deep work of transformation that can only occur in the fertile darkness of inner contemplation, away from the harsh light of constant scrutiny and the exhausting demands of perpetual social engagement. Carl Jung understood that solitude serves as the sacred chamber where the soul conducts its most essential work. According to Jung, the psyche requires periods of withdrawal not as escape mechanisms, but as necessary conditions for psychological integration and spiritual development. He observed that those who honor their need for solitude often possess a deeper relationship with their unconscious mind, allowing them access to wisdom and creativity that remains hidden from those who never venture into the depths of their own being. This is not antisocial behavior. It is the behavior of someone learning to become genuinely social by first becoming authentically individual. The desire for solitude often emerges during what Jung termed the individuation process, the psychological journey towards wholeness and self-realization. During this process, the psyche begins to shed the false personas we have constructed to navigate social expectations, revealing the authentic self that lies beneath. This revelation can feel overwhelmingly intense, requiring the sanctuary of solitude to process and integrate these emerging aspects of personality. Jung would say that this withdrawal is not pathological, but necessary, like a serpent retreating to shed its skin or a butterfly requiring the darkness of its cocoon for transformation. In Jungian psychology, the archetype of the hermit represents not isolation, but profound inner illumination. The hermit withdraws not from fear but from wisdom, understanding that certain truths can only be discovered in the silence between thoughts, in the space between heartbeats, in the profound stillness that exists beneath the surface turbulence of daily life. This archetype appears across cultures and throughout history, suggesting that the call to solitude is not a modern anomaly, but an essential aspect of the human experience, encoded in our collective unconscious as a pathway to wisdom and self-knowledge. The hermit's lamp, a powerful symbol in Jungian imagery, does not illuminate the external world, but the internal landscape of the soul. When you feel drawn to solitude, you're answering the call to become your own source of light, rather than constantly seeking illumination from others. Jung recognized that true psychological maturity requires this capacity for self-illumination, this ability to find meaning and purpose from within, rather than depending entirely on external validation and direction. The soul that cries out for solitude is not crying out in distress. It is calling you home to yourself. Yet this journey into solitude is rarely understood or supported by the world around you. Society interprets your withdrawal as rejection, your need for space as antisocial behavior, your quest for inner understanding as selfish indulgence. Friends and family may express concern, offer unwanted advice, or pressure you to get back out there before you have completed the internal work that solitude facilitates. This external pressure can create a profound sense of alienation, making you question whether your instincts are trustworthy or whether you are indeed as broken as others suggest you might be. The misunderstanding you face is not merely social but existential. You may find yourself caught between two worlds, the external world that demands constant engagement and performance, and the internal world that requires quiet contemplation and authentic expression. This tension can manifest as anxiety, depression, or a deep sense of not belonging anywhere. Jung would recognize this as an encounter with what he called the shadow, those aspects of yourself and your culture that are rejected, misunderstood, or feared. The shadow includes not only negative traits, but also positive qualities that are too threatening to the status quo to be fully accepted. When you honor your need for solitude, you may discover that certain relationships begin to feel superficial or draining. Conversations that once satisfied now feel hollow. Social gatherings that once energized now leave you depleted. This shift can be deeply disorienting, making you wonder whether you have become antisocial or whether you are losing your capacity for human connection. Jung would suggest that you are not losing anything, but rather gaining discrimination, the ability to distinguish between genuine connection and mere social performance, between relationships that nourish your soul and those that merely satisfy social expectations. The path of individuation often requires what Jung called the night sea journey, a descent into the depths of the unconscious where transformation occurs in darkness and apparent isolation. During this journey, you may feel profoundly alone, misunderstood by those who have not undertaken similar inner exploration. This feeling is not pathological, but archetypal, experienced by every individual who chooses the difficult path of becoming authentic rather than remaining acceptable. The loneliness you feel is not evidence of your inadequacy, but proof of your courage to venture beyond the familiar shores of social conformity into the uncharted waters of self-discovery. Jung recognized that the impulse towards solitude activates one of humanity's most ancient and powerful archetypes, the wise hermit who withdraws from society to gain deeper wisdom. This archetype appears across cultures as the sage on the mountain, the mystic in the desert, the philosopher in contemplation. These figures are not celebrated for their social skills, but for their capacity to access truths that can only be discovered in solitude. When your soul cries out for alone time, it is connecting you to this timeless pattern of human development that honors withdrawal as a necessary precursor to wisdom. According to Jung, the psyche contains both personal and collective layers, and the desire for solitude often signals that you are ready to explore the deeper, collective layers of your being. In solitude, you move beyond the personal dramas and immediate concerns that dominate social interaction and begin to encounter the universal themes and archetypal patterns that connect you to all of humanity. This encounter is not available through social interaction alone. It requires the deep listening that can only occur when external noise is quieted and internal wisdom is allowed to emerge. The archetype of the hermit also represents the capacity for self-reliance and inner authority. Jung observed that psychologically mature individuals develop what he called the transcendent function, the ability to bridge conscious and unconscious material and create new solutions to life's challenges. This function develops most effectively in solitude, where you are free from external expectations and social pressures that might interfere with your natural psychological processes. The hermit's journey is not about rejecting others, but about developing the inner resources necessary for genuine relationship and authentic contribution to the world. In Jungian thought, the call to solitude often coincides with what he termed the encounter with the self, the archetype that represents wholeness and psychological integration. This encounter cannot be mediated by others. It must be experienced directly through sustained inner work. The self emerges not through social validation, but through the patient cultivation of inner awareness that occurs when you trust your need for solitude despite social pressure to do otherwise. Jung would say that your soul's cry for alone time is actually the self calling you home to your own deepest nature and highest potential. Through sustained engagement with solitude, a profound transformation begins to occur. What initially felt like withdrawal from life reveals itself as an advancement towards life. But life on your own terms, rather than terms dictated by social expectations and cultural conditioning. The time spent in your own company becomes a masterclass in self-knowledge, teaching you to distinguish between your authentic voice and the chorus of external opinions that once dominated your inner landscape. Jung would describe this as the emergence of individual consciousness from the collective unconscious, a process that requires solitude to complete successfully. As you develop comfort with your own company, you begin to discover that solitude is not empty, but abundantly full. The silence contains symphonies of insight. The stillness reveals movement of thought and feeling that were previously drowned out by external noise. You learn to appreciate the texture of your own thoughts, the rhythm of your own breathing, the unique perspective that emerges when you are not constantly adjusting yourself to accommodate others. This appreciation grows into a form of self-love that is not narcissistic but nourishing, not selfish but generous in its effects on all your relationships. The person who emerges from this journey into solitude possesses what Jung called psychological sovereignty, the capacity to be self-determining rather than other-directed, authentic rather than adaptive, whole rather than fragmented. This sovereignty is not achieved through dominance over others, but through mastery of oneself, not through rejection of relationship, but through the development of the inner resources necessary for genuine intimacy. When you no longer need others to complete you, you become capable of choosing relationships based on joy and growth, rather than need and dependency. This transformation culminates in what might be called dangerous wholeness. Dangerous not because it harms others, but because it threatens systems and relationships built on incompleteness and codependency. The person who has learned to thrive in solitude becomes immune to manipulation through loneliness, resistant to relationships that require self-betrayal, and capable of standing alone when necessary to maintain integrity. Jung recognized that such individuals often become inadvertent teachers and healers, not through what they say, but through their very presence as examples of integrated human potential. When someone has truly integrated the gifts of solitude, their re-engagement with the world carries a different quality entirely. They return not as someone seeking to fill an inner void through external connection, but as someone offering the fullness they have discovered within themselves. Their presence becomes magnetic, not because they need others, but because they have something genuine to offer. Jung observed that individuals who have completed significant inner work often find that others are naturally drawn to them, sensing the authenticity and groundedness that comes from sustained self-exploration. The relationships formed by someone who has embraced solitude tend to be deeper and more meaningful than those built on mutual neediness or social convention. Having learned to be alone without loneliness, they can be with others without losing themselves. They no longer feel compelled to agree when they disagree, to perform when they prefer authenticity, or to small talk when deeper conversation would be more nourishing. This selectivity is not snobbery, but wisdom, the natural result of knowing what truly feeds the soul and what merely occupies time. Have you noticed how some people can enter a room and immediately change its energy, not through dramatic gestures, but through their simple presence? Jung would say these individuals have likely done the deep work of solitude, integrating their shadow material and connecting with their authentic self. They carry within them a quality of presence that can only be cultivated in aloneness, a centeredness that is not dependent on external circumstances, a peace that is not threatened by chaos, a love that is not diminished by giving. The ultimate gift of embracing solitude is the development of what Jung called the individuated personality, someone who has become uniquely themselves while remaining connected to the universal human experience. Such individuals serve as bridges between the personal and transpersonal, the individual and collective, the known and unknown. They demonstrate through their very existence that the soul's cry for solitude is not a retreat from humanity, but an advance towards the fullest expression of human potential. Their journey into aloneness ultimately serves not only their own development, but the evolution of consciousness itself. As you sit with these words, perhaps you recognize the echo of your own soul's calling towards solitude, the restlessness you have felt in crowded rooms, the exhaustion that follows social gatherings, the inexplicable yearning for time alone. These are not symptoms of social inadequacy, but signs of psychological sophistication. Your inner wisdom recognizes what your conscious mind has been taught to doubt, that periods of solitude are not luxuries, but necessities for anyone committed to authentic living and genuine self-development. Consider this moment an invitation to trust your instincts rather than social expectations. When your soul cries out for solitude, it is not crying out in distress but in anticipation, anticipating the discoveries that await in the fertile darkness of your own company, the insights that can only emerge when external noise is quieted and internal wisdom is given space to speak. Jung understood that the individuation process requires periods of withdrawal from collective consciousness to develop individual consciousness, and your recognition of this need marks you as someone ready for profound psychological and spiritual development. The path ahead may feel uncertain, and the pressure to conform to social expectations of constant connectivity may feel overwhelming at times. Remember that every person who has made a significant contribution to human understanding has spent considerable time in solitude, not because they rejected humanity, but because they understood that authentic service to others requires first becoming authentic to oneself. Your willingness to honor your need for alone time places you in the company of philosophers, artists, mystics, and psychologists who recognized solitude as a sacred practice rather than a social failure. You are not broken, antisocial, or inadequate. You are awakening to dimensions of existence that can only be explored in the sanctuary of your own consciousness. The world needs individuals who have done this inner work, who have learned to be whole rather than merely socially acceptable, who can offer genuine presence rather than performed personality. Trust the wisdom of your soul's calling towards solitude, for in answering this call, you serve not only your own highest development, but the evolution of human consciousness itself. You are not alone in this journey. You are joining the timeless community of individuals who have chosen depth over superficiality, authenticity over acceptance, and wholeness over mere social survival.